Now, from the word of the Lord, this lesson is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16. He also said to his disciples, "There was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be a steward.' Then the steward said within himself, 'What shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, and when I am put out of the stewardship, that they may receive me into their houses.' So he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generations than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon." Amen. Our second lesson comes from the work Heavenly Secrets, or Cana Celestia. This is a portion of number 5432. "They who have arrived at maturity, and still more, those who have arrived at old age, and have not viewed with their own eyes the truths of the church, which are called doctrinal things, and seen whether they are true, and then been willing to live according to them, retain them merely as they do all other memory knowledges. They are in their natural memory only, and thence on their lips. And when they utter them not from their interior man or from the heart, but only from the exterior man and from the mouth. Then a man is in this state, he cannot believe that the truths of the church are true, although it seems to him that he so believes. The reason why it seems to him that he believes them to be true is that he relies on others and has confirmed in himself the teachings of others. It is very easy to confirm things taken from others, whether true or false, for this needs nothing but ingenuity. Such persons seek nothing but faults in those who are in truths from good, in order that they may accuse and condemn them. They ridicule and condemn the veriest truths, if any such are to be found, for they do not comprehend that truths are true. The reason of this is that they have no affection of truth for its own sake, still less for the sake of life, but only for the sake of gain. Moreover, when such men read the word, they search it with the sole end of confirming the doctrinal memory knowledges for the sake of gain. And many of them search the word that the truths of the church are not truths, but only serviceable for persuading others that they are truths, again, for the sake of gain. But they who are in the affection of truth, for the sake of truth and of life, consequently for the sake of the Lord's kingdom, have indeed faith in the doctrinal things of the church. But still, they search the word for no other end than the truth, from which their faith and their conscience are formed. If anyone tells them that they ought to stay in the doctrine of things of the church in which they were born, they reflect that if they had been born in Judaism or Socinianism or Quakerism, Christian Gentilism, or even out of the church, the same would have been told them. And that it is everywhere said, "Here is the church, here is the church, here are the truths, and nowhere else." And this being the case, the word should be searched with devout prayer to the Lord for enlightenment. Such do not disturb anyone within the church, nor do they ever condemn others, knowing that everyone who is a church lives from his faith. Amen. Our text for this morning comes from Luke 16. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. All of us here today are engaged in a great struggle. The struggle between the immediate delights that come from the things of self and the world, and the much greater delights that are promised in heaven if we turn away from the loves of self and the world during our natural life. This is further complicated by the fact that many worldly things are in fact worthy of our attention, because when they're approached correctly, they are outward expressions of spiritual things and are in essence spiritual. Examples of such things are acts of charity and benevolence, where we do things of genuine benefit to others less fortunate than ourselves by assisting with things like education and employment. It seems almost too obvious to say that the main difference between the natural and spiritual person is shown by the kinds of things that they think about and do, and even more importantly, by the reason why they do the things they do. Those who love the pleasures of the world more than anything else and to the exclusion of all else are those who, in our text, are said to worship mammon. While those who turn away from self and the world to the Lord and the neighbor are those who look to God as their master. Our purpose today is to hear how the doctrine of the new church defines the difference between the natural and the spiritual person, for the sake of learning how, from being natural by birth, we may, through our efforts and with the Lord's help, be reborn as spiritual beings. We're all interested in truth, or at least truth in the form of information. If that were not true, there would be no market for books, newspapers, magazines, television, radio, the internet, and, of course, social media. We would spend far less time in conversation with each other because we like to hear news and stories about other people's lives. The doctrines tell us that the reason we are so hungry for information is that there are spirits with us all the time. Those spirits serve important use of rooting spiritual influx into our minds, both from heaven and from hell. And in this way, they provide us with spiritual freedom and a great variety of ideas for us to examine and to choose between. At the same time, because they are spiritual beings, they hunger and thirst not for food and drink, but for good and truth. Therefore, the thirst that they feel for truth and its application is what we feel as curiosity and the desire to learn new skills and disciplines. The thirst for truth is a faculty in everyone, although obviously it's more developed in some than others. The thirst can be equally developed in the good and the evil. So the presence of the thirst for truth is not in itself an adequate test of a person's spiritual quality. We have to look farther. We are taught that the natural external person seeks truth, studying the Word, studying the natural things, studying all kinds of different subjects, for the sake of self and the world, rather than for the sake of knowing the truth itself. Because they are primarily interested in what truth can do for their own pleasures of life, they do not see the good that it can do. Such people do not know what good or charity is, nor do they care about heaven or hell. In fact, those who attend church, and many do for many external reasons, do not understand the doctrines of their own church, nor do they particularly care whether they're true or false. They learn them for their sake of their reputation among others in the world, not for the good that they might do through them. Such people, because they are, as their spirits, always looking down, will deny that there is an internal sense to the word. They don't seek truth for the sake of doing good. They have no enlightenment about the word from the Lord. But even more serious than the fact that such natural people are not enlightened when they read the word is the fact that those people who have no affection for truth for the sake of truth, but only for the sake of fame, honor, and gain, do not live the life of charity, and therefore they make one with hell. Such people are those who are signified in the word by the dragon. On the other hand, we're told that the spiritual person, someone who truly desires to become spiritual, seeks truth for the sake of truth itself, not for personal gain or for immediate pleasure. Those who love to do truth for the sake of truth, from an internal or spiritual affection, rejoice when they hear the truth, for they immediately begin to think about ways that these truths can be incorporated into their lives. Such people also love the Lord because they know that the truth that gives them such pleasure is from Him, and that He causes it to become good through their willing it and doing it, thus bringing them into harmony with the uses of heaven and the resulting delights which they then feel. Those who are in the love of truth for the sake of truth rather than for the sake of personal gain also serve the church in an important way, although they may not even be aware of it. We read again from the Arcana. This is from number 9424. But be it known that all the doctrine of the church must be from the Word, and that the doctrine from any other source than the Word is not doctrine in which there is anything of the church, still less anything of heaven. But the doctrine must be collected from the Word, and while it is being collected, the man must be in enlightenment from the Lord. And he is in enlightenment when he is in the love of truth for the sake of truth, and not for the sake of self and the world. These are they who are enlightened in the Word when they read it, and who see truth, and from it make doctrine for themselves. The reason of this is such that they communicate with heaven, thus with the Lord. And being enlightened by the Lord in this way, they are led to see the truths of the Word, such as they are in heaven. For the Lord inflows through heaven into their understanding, because it is the man's interior understanding that's enlightened. And at the same time, the Lord flows in with faith by means of the cooperation of the new will, a feature which is to be effected with truth for the sake of truth. So the concept of enlightenment becomes a key issue to those in the church, because it's through enlightenment that the cold truths of the Word begin to live and bring connection with the angels of heaven and the delights that are associated with them. Now, enlightenment is not some gift to the lucky few, but something that the Lord seeks to give to everyone who prepares themselves to receive it. One prepares himself for enlightenment by searching the Word for its internal spiritual sense as a means of improving life. Then, because such a person is in externals, the literal story, and at the same time in internals, the spiritual meaning of the literal story, and because the intention is to use such knowledge to do good to others, the person has put himself in the sphere and life of heaven itself. The angels draw near and add their encouragement, and light from heaven is allowed to shine on the subject being studied, and that heavenly light is what enlightens the mind, leading it to see truth in its proper spiritual environment. Those who are in love of truth for the sake of truth, form the basis of their faith from the doctrine of their church, but they will continue to read the Word for themselves. In this way, they form the faith and conscience from the truths which they find there. This means that they may believe some things that are in variance with the official doctrinal position of the church. But if anyone tells them that they ought to remain in the doctrine of the church, they may think that the same thing could be said no matter what the church they belong to said. One could take the cynical view and say that therefore no church was worth the effort. Or one could take the approach that although the Lord did not himself form any church when he was on earth, he did provide us with the Word. That being the case, it is the Word that should be searched with devout prayer to the Lord for enlightenment as to its meaning and application. Such people who are seeking the truth for the sake of truth do not disturb the church, but strengthen it when they share their ideas and discoveries with others. They never condemn others for their beliefs, for they know that everyone who is at church lives from his own faith derived from the study of the Word and is understood according to his own circumstances and needs. While it is true that we were born for heaven, it's also true that the attractions of the natural pleasures of the world, things that affect our body and the lower parts of our minds, tend to pull us down. And on the other hand, our spirit is being continually lifted up and led toward heaven, because the natural tendency of our spirit is to grow in wisdom and usefulness. Both these tendencies are ours from birth, and it's the challenge in this world to avoid the one and encourage the other. The Lord has given us the means to do so in the Word. We can study the Word to learn what is right, and we can compel ourselves to do it, even if we don't want to. But the key concept that is stated so many times in the Word is that we have to continually refer back to the Word as our source, our touchstone, and compare our thoughts and actions to it, rather than against the standards set by people in the world. As mentioned a moment ago, the Lord never established a church. He came into the world to teach truth, and then men established the church for the twofold purpose of worship and instruction. They recognized that worship is essential to the acknowledgement of Jesus Christ as God and not just a man, while instruction is essential for everyone to live a life in this world that will be in accord with spiritual principles and which will therefore prepare someone for heaven. This is why this church provides for both worship and instruction. It should be a matter of conscience for each member to avail himself to both as often as possible. To come around full circle, just as a person can wish to learn the truth and even love it for the sake of personal profit and self-satisfaction, so a person can be a member of a church for purely selfish and external reasons. Such people who are not in the love of truth for the sake of truth are said to be in the church but not of it. Those alone are of the church in whom the church is, and the church is in those who are in the affection of truth for the sake of truth, and the affection of good for the sake of good. Thus, those who are in love toward the neighbor and in love to God. They who are not of this character are not of the church, no matter how much they may be in the church. Truth, even genuine truth from the Word, does not reform a person, because by our nature, everyone is able to learn truth, then talk about it, and even teach others through our ability to elevate our understanding above the loves of our will. But we can be reformed, and we are reformed, if we develop an affection for truth for the sake of truth. For this affection for truth, apart from the pleasures of self and the world, conjoins itself with the will, then further conjoins the will to the understanding. And this process is the beginning of the Lord's process of reformation and regeneration. So the Word tells us what we must do, and throughout our life we struggle to do it in spite of what our natural inclinations lead us to desire. Eventually we find it's not too difficult to refrain from our evils as it once was, and it actually becomes pleasant for us to do what is right. But still, we always wonder if we're progressing fast enough, and far enough to be ready for heaven when our time comes. The heavenly doctrines tell us there are signs that we can perceive that give us an indication that we are getting ready for heaven. Again, reading from the Arcana Celestia. The signs that sins have been forgiven are the following. Delight is felt in worshiping God for the sake of God, in being of service to the neighbor for the sake of the neighbor, thus in doing good for the sake of good, and in believing truth for the sake of truth. There is an unwillingness to merit by anything that belongs to charity and faith. Evils such as enmities, hatreds, revenges, unmercifulness, and adulteries, in a word, all things that are against God and against the neighbor, are shunned and held in aversion. So even when we learn truth from the Word, we are engaged in the great struggle between heaven and hell. Are we learning them for the sake of truth and of life, or are we learning them for the sake of personal gain? We need to examine ourselves as to our intentions and our actions from the knowledge that our love of gain is an earthly affection, while the affection of truth is a spiritual affection, and that one or the other must have dominion in our minds, for we cannot serve two masters. Again, from our text, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Amen.